we were inventing a game system, but just as we were almost done with it, the entire game industry collapsed and it completely fell apart. All of the game system sales dropped to zero. They stopped being able to sell arcade system. The arcades started closing. It was a devastating time, and it looked like it was the end for Amiga, because there was all of a sudden no hope, no desire for a game system to be able to survive. But fortunately for us, we had more than just a game system. We had a whole computer. And so we were able to, with only a little bit of effort, change the course of the ship and have it not be an entertainment system, but instead be a new computer that we were going to try to launch. And the only thing that the Amiga lacked at that time, the only two things that it lacked that would make it be a really good computer system, was it didn't have a user interface and it didn't have a DOS. I was able to fix the user interface problem. Unfortunately, no one was ever able to finish the DOS problem. To this day, the DOS on the Amiga is not what we would have liked it to be. It was a pretty good thing, and it's a long story why we ended up with the DOS that we did, and we're happy that we had that DOS, because the alternative was to have none whatsoever. And it's a long and it's an ugly story what happened with the original company that was working on the DOS for us. And so I'm glad that we were fortunate that we had this backup plan that allowed us to have the DOS that we had. But the DOS was lame compared with what we really would have wanted it to be. It was old technology. It wasn't very powerful, and it was sad. But at the Amiga, for the development of the Amiga, I originally joined the team as part of the system engineering group. I was an assistant to the fellow who was working on the graphics library, and I contributed at that level to it. But then over time, I developed more skills and developed the sort of relationship with the other engineers where they finally decided to make me director of software engineering, which I did for a while, until we decided that what we had to do was to create a real computer, not just a game system. And we saw that the biggest hole that we had was the need for a user interface. So I looked at the entire issue and decided that I could do it, that I could create a user interface for the Amiga. But it was impossible for me to be the director of the software engineering and to work on the user interface at the same time. So I gave that position up, and they gave it to someone else, and I started working on the user interface instead. The people that are at assembly will appreciate this part of the story. I boldly claimed that I could create a user interface, and we only had 7 months between when we identified the need and when we were scheduled to launch the computer. And so I claimed that I could create a user interface for the computer in 7 months, and there was no other engineers who could help. Everyone was so busy working on everything else that it had to be a one-man job. There was some thought about trying to hire someone else, but we knew that it would take months to find someone qualified, and so we didn't even try. My bosses agreed that they would give me a shot at it, and they would let me do the user interface by myself. And then what followed, without exaggeration, was 7 months of 100 hours a week, every week, nonstop, except for during the Easter period when they closed the doors for 4 days and they wouldn't let anyone into the building at all unless you had some emergency. Which I did. I left a key in the office, and I had to finally get in, and the security guard wouldn't let me in until he called the boss first. And it took me a few minutes to find the key because I couldn't find it, and there's a security guard at the door watching me to make sure that I didn't sit down and work. And I was tempted because I had a lot to do. But I managed to pull it off, but it was an incredible haul. It was unlike anything I'd ever done before or since in my career. That was probably the hardest I ever worked in my whole career. But I pulled it off. It was great. And so the user interface on the Amiga, which was called Intuition, was my invention. And the end part of that story was that later on, when we were making business cards in time for the launch of the machine, they wanted to know what title I would want to have within the company. And I had been director of software engineering, and to come up with a title that was good but didn't feel like too much of a step down from being the director of engineering and all that. We were thinking about what sort of title we would give me, and we finally settled on what was also the best title I've ever had in my entire career. We called me Director of Intuition. That was me. People would say, Director of Intuition? Oh man, I really love that title. And I would say, I knew you were going to say that. So we first showed the Amiga at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1984. The CES back then was the premier show for entertainment products, hardware, software, all manner of products like that. It's no longer the case that the show is the showcase for those things, but it was then. And it was a very well attended show. It was consumer electronics of all sorts, from car speakers and stereos to entertainment to blenders and washing machines. I mean, they have everything at the CES. And the Amiga was one corner of a very large show, but there was a buzz that developed over the course of the show that there was something going on at the Amiga booth, and you had to see it. But no one could. You couldn't see it because the Amiga was hidden, as it had been all along. During the early days of Amiga, we were afraid about the competition. We didn't want anyone to know what we were doing, so that's why we gave the company a name that was obscure, that didn't say it was Amiga Computer. It was just Amiga Inc. was the name of it in the beginning. And in the early days, we had a line of joysticks and other peripherals, including the Joyboard. And the Joyboard